Charli XCX, and this next song is a song that I feature on, and a song that I wrote. I thought this fucking song was big in Germany.
There's an ongoing revolution in pop music happening right now on the edges of the mainstream.
Have some juice, honey, rich bitch juice. You're beside Lily, need to let loose.
This new musical movement consists of a diverse group of experimental leading artists who tend to incorporate pop music conventions into left-field bass and synth-heavy production styles. Spotify has even coined this new trend, Hyperpop, a new brand of eccentric pop music that aims to shift listeners' perceptions of what pop can be and sound like. A vital figure, and arguably the face of this new style, is the one and only Charli XCX, an iconoclast bent on pushing those boundaries.
Now that goes here in my head.
I will always love you. I'll love you forever. Even when we're not together, I will always love you. I'll love you forever. Said I'll love you forever.
Earlier in the 2010s, Charli flirted with global superstardom off the backs of feature and songwriting credits on massive hits such as Iggy Azalea's Fancy, Icona Pop's I Love It, and her own song, Boom Clap. She then pivoted away from the mainstream to help popularize this current movement in weirdo pop music, now enjoyed by millions of people around the world. I want to explore the evolution of this new genre by detailing Charli XCX's central location within the scene, as well as describe her vast influence on artists who are taking the style into new directions. It's not a new tradition for musicians to experiment with pop music conventions. However, the emerging specific characteristics of hyperpop can be more or less traced back to the early 2010s. Artists like Grimes and Sky Ferreira represented an emerging popularity in experimental-leaning indie pop that mixed synthy, left-of-center pop sensibilities with an amalgamation of different styles and influences. Their hipster fan appeal straddled the line between two different worlds, with one foot hanging on to accessible pop conventions and the other firmly enraptured in more strange and interesting indie sounds. Grimes' breakthrough album Visions, for example, uses atmospheric, dreamy electronic textures and vocal effects to mutate the pop melodies and structures that underlie each song.
I needed to kind of like make my record sound a bit more, like have some different flavors to it, because I feel like everyone just makes one album that sounds the same at the moment, and I want to bring things that capture me as a person now, you know, like.
British pop singer Charli XCX was working within a similar framework. Like those other artists, Charli borrowed from a wide variety of sounds and influences.
Your eyes keep staring me straight through. Only meant to be two hearts going room. 1, 2, 3, so I guess I better leave the room. Don't break my heart.
early mixtapes like 2012's Super Ultra showcased Charli's early desire to mix her pop songwriting talent with glossy, quirky instrumentals. And accordingly, the songs sound less like they belong on top 40 radio than they do in the hazy rave clubs where Charli grew her reputation. But the pop presentation is clearly front and center, and you can already hear Charli's immense talent for writing catchy melodies and hooks.
The sun is shining through the clouds. I put my love into your mouth and I feel so high.
Charli's dedication to crafting electronic dance songs that still sounded distinctly pop foreshadowed the aesthetics of what we now call hyperpop. It also foreshadowed Charli's capacity to reach the appeals of mainstream listeners. Her talent could have carved a path to traditional pop stardom, a road that seemed more and more likely after each high-profile collaboration.
Trash the hotel. Let's get drunk on the minibar. Make the phone.
But as we know, things didn't really shake out like that. Charli's 2013 album, True Romance, was well received by critics, but dwarfed in the public eye by the more conventional pop hits she was involved in.
Wish you could see me when I'm lying in bed. My eyes are blinded by your stars. My blood is blushing so red.
This led to an internal struggle of whether to conform to the radio-friendly style that had gotten her some international exposure, or to make the music she truly believed in. This clash of desires resulted in 2014's Sucker, a haphazard, punk-influenced pop album that was decidedly cleaner and more top 40 sounding than anything Charli had made up until that point.
Till we die. I don't wanna go to school. I just wanna break the rules. Boys and girls across the world. Put it on.
Personally, I think Sucker still showed many of the elements that make Charli's music so great, including all the sticky hooks and exciting vocal performances that we've come to expect.
This must be love. Boom, clap, sound in my heart. The beat goes on and on and on and on. Boom, clap, you make me feel good. Come on to me now.
But sonically, the album is a clear discrepancy in Charli's catalog, and the frustrating process of that album's creation and reception led to a significant transition in Charli's career. Fed up with her position in between conventional stardom and edgy indie darling status, Charli linked up with PC Music in 2015 and forged her own vision of what a pop star can look and sound like. British producer A.G. Cook founded PC Music in 2013 as a label and marketing experiment that sought to mold pop personas out of unconventional images and sounds. After a consistent string of releases, the label and its artists came to represent a style in and of itself. A relentless use of dance and pop music cliches pushed to their extremes, with bright, vibrant instrumentals that implemented glossy synth textures, pitched up vocals, and bouncy drum patterns. The music's inspiration came from an array of sources, ranging from late 90s bubblegum pop, to J-pop, to video game music. This approach to deconstructed pop is now commonly referred to as bubblegum bass, a sometimes incoherent but also weirdly accessible style that at the time sounded like the pop of the future, polarizing the music world while cultivating a rabid fanbase. This new, bold vision for pop music was the perfect fit for Charli XCX and the direction she was leaning towards.
Let's ride. Let's ride. Let's ride. Let's ride.
Their first collaboration was 2016's Vroom Vroom, an EP produced almost entirely by the PC Music affiliate SOPHIE, who was well known for a sound that mixed electronic dance music and bubblegum bass with industrial hip-hop influenced beats.
Bitch, I'm here to fuck you up. Wanna make your body pop. Ooh, nah, I'm about to drop. Looking like what we spending, 'cause we got this.
Vroom Vroom was a groundbreaking collection of experimental dance pop songs that showed Charli had chosen to sacrifice a genuine mainstream presence for something far greater. The EP represented a perfect synthesis of Charli's exquisite pop sensibilities with the experimental, versatile, genre-bending dance production of PC music, and in many ways defined what we now refer to as hyperpop. The song sounded like if Gwen Stefani was performing at a grimy robot rave concert. And this reappropriation and fusion of pop aesthetics of the past for something that sounded decidedly of the future became massively influential.
No one gets to know but you. No one gets to know but
The jarring transition between genres and tones also became a major motif for Charli XCX, and is now a definitive hyperpop trait that delights fans as it turns away others.
consequences, 'cause they're never gonna stop me. What? All my life, I've been waiting for a good time, a good time.
And the rest is history. In 2016, A.G. Cook became Charli's creative director, which has now been followed by 4 full-length projects. Her 2017 mixtapes, Number 1 Angel and Pop 2,
I keep it sticky, feel like lip gloss. Roller coaster ride in the fast lane, got the roof down, kiss me hard and now it's pouring rain.
her 2019 self-titled studio album,
Screaming out, when you're not around, when you're not around, when you're not around.
and her quarantine album, How I'm Feeling Now.
Yeah, I just wanna go real hard. I just wanna go real hard. Pink diamond in the dark. I just wanna go real hard. I just wanna go.
For many, Pop 2 was the pinnacle of everything Charli and PC Music had been building up until that point. The album, as its title suggests, was a transcendental pop masterpiece, with soaring melodies, futuristic production, and genre subversion.
I blame it on you. Every time I fuck it up, I blame it on you.
What's really incredible about these projects is their place in the center of this alternative pop movement. Charli's ever-growing list of collaborators is akin to a self-sustaining art pop movement. Her style invariably leaks into the styles of other artists and vice versa, resulting in a symbiotic creative process that helps grow a supportive, inclusive musical ecosystem of which Charli is the nucleus. This feedback loop can be seen in artists who fully embody, sonically, aesthetically, and politically, the convention-breaking ethos of experimental hyperpop, and who are now also becoming the new faces of the genre. Dorian Electra, for example, gained significant exposure through their feature on Charli XCX's Pop 2 song Fembot, a collaboration that eventually resulted in them touring together. For a pop star, Dorian draws from surprising cultural influences, with inspirations that range from medieval architecture to various branches of philosophy. Their music is bright, bombastic, and theatrical, traits reflected just as well in their image and persona. They are the definition of camp, the historically queer artistic tradition that uses modes of presentation rejected by mainstream dominant society, and an aesthetic philosophy that fits perfectly into hyperpop's left-of-center sensibilities.
I'm flamboyant, I go all the way. I'm flamboyant, I go all the way.
Dorian identifies as gender fluid, and their music, which resembles a startling combination of bubblegum bass and Britney Spears, broaches topics virtually untouched by mainstream pop stars. They attack and dismantle dominant notions of gender, like what it means to be a man, a woman, both, or neither. Their musical and ideological fusion perfectly reflects the norm-defining nature of this new pop space, a space where such radical expression can exist. Rina Sawayama, who has individually toured with both Charli XCX and Dorian, is a British-Japanese artist that also looks to the past for inspiration, with a style that reflects a more direct pastiche of various 90s and early 2000s sounds and artists. Rina's influences vary between R&B pop stars like Mariah Carey, Britney Spears, Gwen Stefani, Japanese icon Hikaru Utada, and even nu metal acts like Evanescence and Limp Bizkit. Impressively, she manages to incorporate all these inspirations into something entirely original and fresh. And a part of what makes her so interesting is her ability to naturally jump between these different sounds.
Have you ever thought about taking your big mouth shut? 'Cause I have many times, many times.
The intense, conjoined presence of her influences may confound listeners, but for fans of the hyperpop genre, it's exactly what they're looking for. With instantly catchy hooks, grand guitar solos, and pristine production from collaborator Clarence Clarity, Rina's songs are as illuminating and in-your-face as any other. She, like Dorian, also touches on subjects ignored by mainstream pop acts. Topics like queer experience, identity crisis, consumerism, technological alienation, microaggressions, and generational trauma. She's a total icon. The hyperpop group making some of the biggest waves, while also confusing a large chunk of listeners, may have to be 100 Gecs, the duo of Laura Less and Dylan Brady.
I said nothing's new, nothing's changed, I still need you. I'm about to hit the booth.
At first glance, 100 Gecs might not sound like Charli at all, or really like anything else. But look closely and you can see all the PC music influences and hyperpop elements which Charli helped popularize. The maximalist production, the disparate genre blending, and the pop conventions pushed to their unnatural extremes. The group has been described as post-internet, a distillation of our experience of constant exposure to anything and everything. And indeed, listening to their breakthrough album 1000 Gecs can be an extraterrestrial roller coaster experience that brings you into new yet uncannily familiar worlds, all expressed through an abrasive veil of distortion.
You text me, I love you, and then I fucking ghost you. The big boys coming with the big stuff. I feel so clean, like I'm not even sure. Big boys coming with the big truck. Feel so clean, like I'm not even sure.
Dylan Brady can now be seen offering his production to a host of hyperpop artists, helping to redefine the sound as it enters this new decade. He's made multiple beats for Charli, including Click with PC music artist Umru, as well as claws and anthems from her new quarantine project, How I'm Feeling Now.
Pull up and we drippin' in gold. The king of my clique when I roll. Hit Kim cause she cute on my phone.
Like your mind, like your smile, like your eyes. I could die, aeroplane, US fly, singing songs like
Charli, in turn, hopped on a remix of the Gecs song Ringtone and played at the group's virtual Minecraft music festival. As I said, hyperpop is like an ecosystem, with artists all giving and taking inspiration from each other. Something really amazing about this new sect of experimental alternative pop music that some call hyperpop is that it wholly defies the typical homogeneity of what pop music is supposed to be. Artists as different as Slater to Kim Petras to up-and-comers That Kid, Guppy, William Crooks, and Sega Bodega all attract a similar fan base under a thread that isn't so much based on genre as it is on a musical philosophy. Regardless, mainstream artists have taken note. Big pop stars like Halsey, Dua Lipa, and even Taylor Swift can also now be seen appropriating electro and nostalgia-infused dance pop aesthetics through a contemporary lens, albeit in more conventional ways and to significantly bigger numbers. That doesn't strip the greater cultural relevance of this hyperpop movement. The LGBTQ community is essential to the genre's growth in popularity, and the movement contains a multitude of artists who stand up for marginalized communities in ways that mainstream personas would never dare to do. Through the inclusive power of the internet, the genre has amassed a collection of experimental pop stars and identities that would have been ignored in the pop music landscape 20 years ago. And as if making up for lost time, many of these hyperpop artists recontextualize those beloved sounds and make them their own. So much of this can be attributed to Charli XCX and the path she forged, as she has used her stature to create a successful lane right outside the pop mainstream. Her description to Apple Music of the song Pink Diamond on her new album is a nice reflection of Charli's career as a whole. I want it as the first track because I'm into the idea that some people will love it and some people will hate it. I think it's nice to be antagonistic on track 1 of an album and really frustrate certain people, but make others really obsessive about what might come next.
I'm so bored. Wake up late, eat some cereal. Try my best to be physical. Lose myself in a TV show. Staring